Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest went to film school to act and produce, and then became a film producer in New York City, where she managed to always assemble a social network of friends and families to keep her drinking and using in check. But when her second marriage fell apart, and she no longer had any guide rails to keep her on track, things started falling apart. While sobriety gave her a new system for living and opened her up to new possibilities, it also helped her discover a long repressed memory that made her wonder if her whole identity rested on a false premise. Won't you please welcome Kim O'Hara. What's your name?
Kim O'Hara.
Kim O'Hara. Like, I don't even think I knew that.
Like, yeah. What's your name? This is a professional operation right here.
Now, there's, yeah.
I could have made up anything. I could have been like Busty Borzella,
yeah, totally. Bartholomew McManus. So, Kim, so where were you born?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, right. We talked about that.
Yes.
And,
where my alcoholism was birthed.
Yeah, so was
Warren, Rhode Island.
And was that like a drinky place?
Yeah, there's not much to do in Warren, Rhode Island, especially if you're in great despair.
And like, what were your parents doing? Were they?
It was like, the latchkey shit.
Oh, right. What were their jobs?
Well, it was a small town. My mom was an entrepreneur,
right.
And my dad was a lawyer.
Right.
And I moved out of my mom's house and moved in with my dad's house after they got divorced.
How old were you when they got divorced?
Like 13.
Ooh,
and
brutal.
then sort of went into like there was no regulatory parental influence. There was a lot of purple double barrel mescaline and white nun wine. And
were they drinkers?
My dad died of alcoholism.
How old were you when your dad died?
He was 60, so it was 15 years ago.
Right, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Was it brutal, the process?
He just had a heart attack.
Oh, right. And so what was your first exposure to drugs and alcohol?
I always, I just did a 45-minute pitch the other day for Robertson Originals, and I said that there was that day I was in the back of this girl, Lisa, I couldn't tell you her last name, Lisa from Texas. And she had her parents had one of those two-tone, brown station wagons.
Yeah, classic.
When you're in the back, the back is the best place to be.
Awesome.
And someone handed me a beer and a cigarette, and I cracked that shit open and drank it, and I was like, I've arrived.
This is me, right?
This is gonna be me forever.
How old were you?
I met them on a canoeing trip in 8th grade.
Right.
7th or 8th grade. 8th grade. Yeah. So I must have been 14 or 15.
Right.
14.
Right.
Yeah. I'm in that classic 13, 14 first drink kind of range. And then there was a lot of pot smoking, and pot smoking became a huge part of my story. Probably even more. My drugs were even more of a part of my story. I always laugh and say, I never thought I was an alcoholic, because who's counting drinks when you're on mescaline or ecstasy?
Right.
You have 19 drinks, so it's not like it's going to affect you.
And what was the first pot you smoked?
Probably with that same group. They were the public school group.
Right.
I was at the private school.
Right.
So, Rhode Island, it's all that brown.
Oh, right.
They had their private undergrad consortium of schools,
right.
But I wasn't wealthy. We were poor.
Right.
I somehow was there. So.
Right.
And so I aligned more to the public school kids.
Right. And what was that first pot like? Was it good?
God, I don't even remember my first hit of pot. I
It's
had this
funny
little pink bong
Right.
that I would have under my bed. But I don't remember my first hit of weed.
I remember mine because I was at boarding school, and one of my new friends went and bought some bad pot from one of the stoners on campus, and we rolled a joint and smoked it, and it didn't do anything.
Right.
But I remember looking at myself in the mirror. It was during the whole Nancy Reagan just say no, and I felt like I had betrayed Jesus or something. And I remember looking at myself.
Or Nancy Reagan.
Yeah. Is there a difference? And looking at myself in the mirror and thinking I'm a different person now, but I couldn't tell from looking at myself.
That's funny.
And then it probably took like a couple times smoking pot before I finally was like, oh, this is the thing that everyone is into, which is interesting because like, I feel like with booze, like my first experience with booze, like I got it. Like my first booze was like 4 years old, but like, you know, then every time I would take a sip from my dad's beer, I would get a little bit of a buzz. And then when I finally like got really fucked up that first time, like there was no, like, I didn't really feel it. Like, whereas pot, I had to go back a couple times, which just goes to show like, it wasn't necessarily about the buzz on some level. It was oh, this is just like trying to get out of myself and experience new things and like have these adventures. You know, it all got toxic eventually, but at first it was like, oh, well,
it was ritualistic too.
Yeah, totally.
It was like the buying of the papers and the rolling of the weed and the de-seeding of the weed, and then you're with the friends, and then you're all laughing, and then you're like hungry, and then you're like eating. It's just like family. And
then how does that evolve into like harder drugs?
That evolved into like cocaine. There was lots of cocaine in Rhode Island, like a lot of cocaine.
And what was your scene? Were you like
Well, I mean, cocaine happened when I got into this junior and senior year in this like private Catholic school.
Right.
And everybody had sort of access to some money.
Right.
And so like there was a lot of cocaine being bought. And all these kids were like smart.
Right.
They all went to college. Like these were not burnouts kids. My group was pretty smart. We were pretty smart, but we just did a lot fucking drugs.
Right. And then where did you end up going to college?
I went to Emerson to be to be an actress, and then I
really?
studied.
Do they have a big acting thing?
They had a big acting school, and then I realized
is it outside of Boston?
It's right
something?
In Boston.
Right.
I mean, it's Cheers. Like my dorm was next to Cheers. You know.
Right. Yeah.
And I ended up switching out of being an actor to being a producer.
Right.
And that sort of. And then I couldn't stay in Boston.
And did they actually have a producing program there?
Yeah, we did like TV shows. We shot Super 8 films. We edited. I have so many Super 8 films that are awful. And then I couldn't finish there.
Why?
So I went with no money. So then I went back to Rhode Island for 8 months.
And what was that like when realizing you can't finish college because you don't have enough money?
It was horrible. My parents gave me no warning. They were like, they picked me up like end of sophomore year, and they were like, you're not going back.
That's
and I was like,
brutal.
Oh, that sucks. Like, what's the plan?
Like,
and they were like, you're going to live in this farmhouse with this guy, Leonard, who's some like Harvard professor, like, because we're not going to let you stay in our house. And then I discovered he was an alcoholic. My parents were like, 13, 14, they were like, we've done our job.
So funny. I was just talking about that this morning with
they were like,
my
we're
friends
done.
like, oh, because I was sort of tempted to send my kids to boarding school and just be like, yeah, I kind of did the work. Like, and I was like, well, that's when everything went awry for me. Like, why would I like take my hand off the wheel now? Like, now is the time to really like focus on steering this motherfucker. And so you live with Lenny in this farmhouse.
And he was an alcoholic.
Right.
And I discovered that. So here I am seeing him go to his daughter's wedding on the property.
Right.
As a total drunk.
Right.
And I decide at all my wisdom of 19 that I'm going to tell him that I think he has a drinking problem.
Right.
And he tells me concurrently that I need to get the fuck out of Rhode Island or I'm going to be a waitress for the rest of my life. So we have this kinship.
And were you waitressing at that point?
I was waitressing.
Right. And were you studying? Were you going to like the local school or no?
No, I was in the journey to burnout. I was like dating like the cocaine guy, you know?
Right.
So he tells me that, and then he says, well, you can't apply to schools that were as expensive as what you just left.
Right.
You got to find somewhere economical, and you've got to get your ass in gear, whatever. And then he disappears, and I don't know where he's gone.
Right.
He's this older black man. And I'm like, I don't know where he's gone. And then he literally one day comes down and he says, I want to show you something. He brings me upstairs and he's got a calendar. And on the calendar is all red X's. And he says, because of you, I'm sober.
No fucking way.
He'd been going to AA.
Wow.
And I went to college 1 month later.
Amazing.
Yeah. It was
what kind of crazy.
It was the most beautiful.
Higher power throws
it was
you
just,
two lunatics
I
together in some farmhouse in Rhode Island. Like, what's going on?
It was really one of the bizarrest. And I remember I'd wake up like so hungover in the morning because I'd drink with all the waiters.
Right.
And there was a farm next, because it was a farmhouse, but we didn't have a farm. but there was an actual farm next door, and there was a bull.
Right.
Every morning, I swear to God, would look right at my window and just bay for like hours. I'd be out there with fucking rocks.
Right.
You fucker. It was like just the land of, but beautiful things too. I mean, you know Rhode Island, and you know that area. So we would have all the mud when the river would go down, and you'd go out in the mud and you'd get real mussels that you could actually legitimately, without dying of some horrible food disease, go inside, clean them, boil them, and eat them.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful experience. Yeah.
And so Lenny gets sober. Where
I go to Canisius in Buffalo.
For college?
Yeah, to finish. Canisius College. For 2 years. Yeah.
And how was that?
It was amazing. And then I went to New York. And then I worked in TV for 2 years. And then I got into film production.
And what were you doing in TV?
I was working for an executive assistant. Right. As an executive assistant to a mucky muck sort of executive at that wealthy time in the 90s where they were doing advertising supported programming. Right. And we had they had done Kate and Alley and Give Me a Break and all these big shows. And they had this whole LA division. And I was just basically the worst executive assistant you could ever have. And this guy was like a $300,000 a year, 30-year-old executive. And I couldn't put it together a freaking 3-colored presentation to save my life, but he kept me. He was loyal to me for a year and a half. That's cool. And I had my Me Too moment in that company too. The chairman of the board tried to jam his tongue down my throat, and I went and confronted him about it. And so it was a lot of experiences in there. And then I started making movies.
Right. And what was your first movie making
experience? Before I got to New York, I was a PA on a film with Alex Karras.
Sure.
I was shot in a horrible amusement park in New Jersey in the heat of the summer. And my job was, as a PA there was a girl who was deathly allergic to bees. And my job was to if I ever saw a bee stinger, was to run over and slam this pen into her. And we're talking years ago. So 30 years ago. So when the pen was these were not lethal pens, And so everywhere this girl go, I'd have to track her. It's summer in New Jersey, and there's Coke spilled and 40 bees, and God, it was just horrible. And then I got another PA job, and then I got smart. I was like, okay, this PAing thing isn't. I'm going to be a coordinator. So then I became a coordinator, and I was like, I want to become a production manager, and then I'm going to become a line producer. And then nobody gives you any respect. No one's going to give you a producing job. So then I did my own producing and raised my own money.
Right. And how'd that go?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I made a bunch of movies. Yeah. It broke as a joke, but I made a bunch of movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Like what? Anything?
Yeah. With Anthony LaPaglia and Eric Stoltz. I made a movie. It was about $1 million. And then I made a movie that I wrote. And then I made a movie with Callista Flockhart before she was Callista Flockhart.
Right.
And, Jared Harris. I did a short film with him before he was. So it was all before they were somebody.
Sure. So through all this, movie making and filmmaking, what is your drinking and using like?
I got really smart after I graduated from college. I decided that I was really on my own, and I knew the drinking and the using was, in the way. And I knew I also needed more of a tribe. So I had a core group of friends in New York, and we would go to bars and we would see each other play, the bands play, and it was just a nice time of New York.
How that group of friends was from?
It was a ragtag. I don't even remember. I met my first husband. He was in film, and I was very enamored by his whole lifestyle because I was in the job. Right. And we were friends for almost a year.
What was his job?
He was a grip.
Right.
So he'd work on Abel Ferrara movies, and he'd work on all these dark, it was the 90s in New York. So it was a lot of independent film. Sure. And we then became an item, and then we moved in together, and then his friends kind of became my friends. And then, it's interesting. I don't remember how we all picked each other up, but we kind of all and we were so young and trying to do so much, and we were so ambitious. So there was drinking and there was a lot of pot smoking, but it was so 20s and acceptable. And I remember even having a friend who would always take it too far. He'd be the Wall Street guy who at happy hour on Friday would step out of the bar at 7 p.m. and he was already Chris, go home, And I was like, oh, that's never going to be, note to self. That's never going to be me. And then I did a music video that I was actually in a bikini with sparklers, which thank God that footage is long lost. But I had a band that we made a video for, and we shot that night. And I remember the next morning getting a phone call. I don't remember his name, but he died. He drank too much. It was like the lead singer. He drank too much the night before, passed out face up, died in his own vomit. And I remember having that first moment of realizing like, oh, you can die of drinking.
Right.
Like it hadn't even crossed my mind.
Right.
And I think after that, I got more oh no, I'm not gonna drink so much that I fall asleep on my back. So there started to become these rules. Don't fall asleep on your back. Always like, if you drink too much, like have a buddy,
Right.
that made the drinking able to be continued.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then how does it sort of start to affect your life?
Like I was a writer, so I had all the Faulkner, Hemingway, evidence, lineage of, the lineage. And I thought, well, I just drink, because I write,
Sure.
And I spent a lot of time with myself when I wrote. So there was a lot of I didn't really drink alone, although it's interesting because recently I heard another alcoholic share about their beer in the shower. And I was like, oh my God, I used to have a beer in the shower. And it sort of horrified me. And it was like nostalgic.
Right.
But also horrifying, that I had a beer in the now, why would anybody bring a beer in the shower? And it was like before I was going out at night. So we would go out to the, Palladium, and we would go out to the I'm forgetting, the Limelight. Have you been to the Limelight?
No, I never. I don't think I ever went.
It was such a happy place.
Yeah, it was one of those places that, as a kid in and around New York, it just seemed a little cooler than I ever got.
Well, I wasn't that cool, but I went.
Right.
Throngs of bodies and just, drinking and just the walk of shame at 4 a.m. and just good stuff, for that time. But that kind of stuff was, that's where there were a lot of drugs.
Right.
So I think that I kept it together for a long time. I think the pot smoking got worse, more so than the drinking for a long time. It was always at the end of the night smoking pot. I was always one of those people that never did it at my job. I never did it, anywhere that I would have to be responsible.
Right.
But let me tell you, when the responsibility was over, I was on it. Right. Yeah.
And then, so what happens that changes things for you?
I don't think things really changed until my 30s. There was something about when that marriage ended that I lost that security. Right. I didn't think that through.
Right.
I just wanted out.
Right.
I in my wisdom now, I understand so much more about my process in that. And that's I lost that person. So now I'm really on my own for the first time in 10 years.
Right.
And I went to Australia to go. It was an amazing gig. It was I was flown first class and put into a 4-star, 5-star hotel. And I'm presenting as a filmmaker. I don't know how I convinced these people that I was worth anything, because I hadn't only made dinky movies.
Right.
And I'm at this party with Sidney Poitier and all these, I'm just and what is on my mind? Get out of here. No one's partying enough, and get to a bar.
Sure.
And I'm willing to walk in Melbourne under railroad. I'm off on my own. Right. It was this self-destruct. It was this breaking the waves. Did you see that movie where she's just on a path of self-destruction? It's this self-destructive path. And I met this couple and we end up drinking together and we end up back at the hotel room. I mean, I am not being a professional at all, you know? And the next morning I wake up and I'm hungover, but I'm ready to roll again. And then I go to the conference and then I meet this guy and we end up partying and it just, I get on a plane and I go and I meet on a plane to Sydney and I meet Sam Worthington. So Sam Worthington's now a major star. But at the time, Sam Worthington wasn't Sam Worthington. He was just Sam Worthington. And I'm so hungover at this meeting, I don't even take off my sunglasses. So I'm that asshole. Okay. And the casting director has put this whole thing together because I was there with a script, a great script. I loved this OCD script that I'd worked so hard on. And she's just like probably disgusted. And all I want to do is just throw up in the trash can. And I'm thinking, what have I done? But then I get back. I don't even feel remorse for how I've just destroyed this great opportunity. I want to find the guy so we can party again. I mean, this is really where and I operated on that behavior all the way through until I met my second husband.
And so
I met him in like a hailstorm of drugs and alcohol. That was like shortly after.
Shortly after? Like, what are we talking?
Like 4 to 6 months after. Not.
So that's a pretty. So you're sort of like spinning out of control. And then how do you meet your husband?
He comes over with a woman who had worked on my movie Happy Hour, who he was roommates with, and she brought him as a friend to my house because I was having an Oscars party. And I think they're together, so I could care less about him. But then I find out he's interested in me, but I don't realize that they're actually sleeping together. I mean, nothing was healthy. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I decide that I need to move him right in. So we did. We moved in right away, and then and then that's, it's sort of like I could identify that Australia trip as really like a turning point, because I never really caught up to myself from there on. I wrote some scripts and sold some scripts and I was making a living, but then I got pregnant.
And what
so now we have to go be grown-ups. He's my ex-husband. He's been my ex for about 12 years. He was like me. He was like USC graduate in film, no real job.
Knocking about Hollywood.
Like editing on like that. What was that TV? It was a reality show with like the guy with the clock. It was like him and Bridget Nielsen and like the very great Flava Flav. There was a reality show with Flava Flav. And he was editing on that, and then he had to get a real job, so we moved to San Jose. And that's when the drinking got really bad. Because what work for Netflix. Yeah.
When was this? This is 12 years ago? Like, what was Netflix?
Yeah.
Netflix was
nothing.
Like
it was a new company.
Sent DVDs out to you in the mail.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah. So I'd say there was where it got.
And had you already had a child when you moved
it's my older daughter, and she was all of 9 months.
And then you had another child while you were there.
And then I had another child while I was there.
And what were you doing? You were just being a mom, or were you working
it was
as
like,
well?
No, it was like really bad. I had no, I was writing. I got a writing office, and excuse me, I did sell, I like every once in a while I'd pop off a screenplay and somehow manage to meet someone and sell it.
And did you guys stay in San Jose?
We left and came back to LA around 2010.
And when did you get sober?
I got sober in 2014 for the first time. Yeah.
And were you guys still married when you got sober?
No. No, I got sober about a year after we split. Yeah.
And tell me about that, like
getting sober.
I suppose the split has something to do with it.
I don't think so.
Right.
I think that we were better suited as co-parents.
Right.
We're excellent co-parents, and he's a great guy. He, in our relationship, I couldn't see him as a great guy, and now he's a great guy. But I started dating someone who was 25 years sober.
Right.
And I was in Al-Anon.
And this was after you guys have broken up or while you're still together?
No, this is after we split.
Right.
And that blew my mind that he was sober.
Right.
And like I would watch him and like how he lived his life sober.
Right.
And
what was your drinking like at that point?
Well, when you date someone who's sober, you tend to not drink as
dial
much.
It back. But
yeah.
I mean, before that, were you?
I was again in that restraint mode,
right.
So I would, I would count, I would like always make sure there was enough wine in the fridge, make sure we didn't run out. If there was like a 2-for-1 at Bevmo, I'd be there in a hot minute, there was that feeling of panic if I ran out of alcohol and couldn't get out of the house.
Right.
I had stopped smoking pot. I had quit that like a year prior. So I had done that cold turkey. I didn't smoke cigarettes anymore. So I was like, it was now just alcohol. So when all the other party favors were gone, alcohol picked up.
Right.
Because it needed to fill such a like gap now, So I felt like I spent a lot of my time managing and controlling the desire to drink and monitoring my alcoholism, which I hadn't even identified was a thing yet.
Right.
And I remember going to a wedding with this person, and I remember he sort of, I think, liked it when I got buzzed on wine, because I was like the fun girl, And so when I got sober, I don't think he was very happy about it because I was going to be now like sober.
How interesting.
And I could feel that around 4 months sober. And I said, this isn't going to work out because I think that you're not going to actually like the new me.
Right.
So we broke up.
Right.
Yeah. So I picked my sobriety over my relationship, which I think is smart in the early
weird,
days.
Like as a sober person, I can't stand being around buzzed, drunk people. I mean, it's not that I can't. I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy people who are sober.
Oh, I can't stand it. Yeah, I have so much judgment about people that slur their words, or I can tell they're really not paying attention to what I have to say.
That's the thing that bugs me.
They're not paying attention.
You're not even listening to anything I'm saying.
Yeah, you're only thinking about yourself.
Why are we having this? Like, why? I don't need to be here. Like, that's it. It's funny because like my like drinking friends are like, why do you leave? And I realize now it's like, oh, because I don't need to be here. Like, you don't need me to be. Like, you don't have any like actual interest in me being here. You just kind of like want to just like play with your lips or something and like
right,
just like make weird noises with your mouth. Anyway,
I remember when I was 8 months sober, I had a funny thing happen. I got hired randomly to be a TV personality for this show. I don't remember how I got this gig, but like cameraman, microphone, dress up, and I was going to shoot this chef who's now actually doing really well with a chicken line. Her name is Pace Webb, and she's not in the sobriety circle at all. Right. She's just a chef. And I had to go interview her at this private dinner party that she was throwing.
Right.
I think it's Chicken Shack she's got now. She's got Daddy Chicken Shack. But so I go to interview her, and then I have to stay for the private party. And there's also like a bartending company that's there, and like they're they're giving away the drinks to the staff, So they're making like the Humphrey Bogart, which is like, a fine aged, gin from like port, like beautiful liquors, and this guy comes from down in the basement, and he's like taking this sake out of like a hole in the wall where it's aged, and he's like, we've never opened this. I mean, it was like the most temptation you could ever have. And he's like, would you like a shot of the sake? And I was like, no. And he's like, why not? I'm like, I'm working, because you're taught to say, I'm working.
Right.
And I just was like, felt like I was being tested, and I passed.
Right. Yeah.
And those interruptions in the brain, in the neuropathways of your brain as an alcoholic, every time that you interrupt that capacity to possibly say yes, I feel like your sobriety gets more and more cemented.
I totally agree with you. I was sort of sponsoring a guy, and he kept relapsing, and I was like, next time you want to have a drink, just call me. Like,
right.
I'm not going to stop you, but calling me will stop you.
Right.
Like, literally, because you will stop whatever the process was that you were in the midst of, and you won't drink. I mean, he never called me.
It's that 500-pound phone.
That is that amazing thing.
Yeah.
Like, I found like when I first stopped drinking, like the hardest thing for me was 7:00, because that's when I would always drink, and like my body was like, where is it? And for a long time I would go for a run every night at 7, because that would get me, if I could get it to 8 or 8:30
right,
without having a drink, I was fine, because then my body knew that it was going to go to bed. And then after a while that went away. I would drink tea at 7 too. It's just something to like give my, distract me from the fact that I was so accustomed to having a drink at that point. I think you're right. Like suddenly that like channel in your brain gets diverted, and now your brain thinks, oh, this is the time. Wait, where's my run?
Right.
Why aren't we going for a run right now?
Right. And doing all these like other things. It's why they say, pick up hobbies, or like, go have fun in AA groups.
How has your life changed? Like getting sober, like what?
Well, now
what are your hobbies?
Well, I play drums, which we're sitting here next to, and I like working on my house, right, and I like working on the trees in front of my house. Right, I found that's like a great.
Are those limes?
There's limes, avocados, apples, guavas, and oranges. Oh, cool. And I get out there with like this tool I bought at like Harbor Freight, and I find like that really like getting with nature really arrests that spirit inside me that feels troubled. Sure. So I've gone out and had a good cry while wrestling the apple trees and swearing at them, and people must think I'm like a crazy person. When I'm done, I'm just like got leaves in my hair. Sure. But it's beautiful to go out there on a Sunday. I mean,
I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall
right,
most of the time. Right.
Well, I tell, I call myself an arborist, right, which is hysterical because I've never done a single stitch of research on how to take care of any trees, but I'm like a spiritual arborist. Right. I can feel like I kind of know when I'm out there. I'm like, well, that branch looks like that one should be cut, and it looks like, I think I read somewhere the smaller branches suck the life and water out of the bigger branches, so that seems like right. Yeah. And then someone gave me, my girlfriend Maida gave me an apple picker, and that was cool. And so I feel like I can't screw what you just said. Nature's gonna do what nature's gonna do. I'm not really gonna mess it up.
Yeah.
It's almost laughing at me. It's like, here she comes again, thinking she actually has power over us. In this house during COVID, I did reset my time. So
and what prompted that?
Lack of emotional sobriety. I look at my emotional sobriety more seriously than I do my physical sobriety. I'm really not concerned about drinking, doing drugs, or smoking pot.
And how would you define emotional sobriety?
Just making really emotionally unstable choices, like self-abandoning, not self-trusting, having no options. So like calling someone, not an option. Like making a gratitude list, not an option. Like,
and they aren't options.
Dating people that aren't right for me, not an option.
Not emotional.
I'm in my own. I've lost.
How do you get sober emotionally?
I rebooted my sobriety time. I took a couple Sudafed when I really didn't need Sudafed. Right. And that was an indication to me that I wasn't taking this thing seriously. That I could just be so like, I've been sober for 6 years. Right. how many meetings have I gone to and how much wisdom have I been imparted, not even just from the rooms, but from just things that my sobriety opened my life up to, just amazing stuff, shamanism and all this incredible stuff. So how can I, after 6 years of spiritual and physical exploration, think the best idea to get out of my pain is to Sudafed? That's an indication to me that
Is it the pseudoephedrine in it that was?
It was
appealing?
the sleepy stuff.
Oh,
yeah,
the sleepy stuff. I like the other side of it, the speedy stuff.
Okay, no, I wanted to go to bed.
Every now and then I have, I'll get like really bad allergies, and I'll take like a pseudoephedrine and be up for. I don't take pseudoephedrine. I take Claritin D, but I'm like, bing, 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 bing. What am I going to do? I'm going to be up all night. How great.
Yeah. So it was an indication to me that I really felt like it was an opportunity, right? To really rethink why I thought I didn't have any other, like, why would I go to that place of such alone despair that this was my only option?
And so how did you manage to right the ship?
I went back, the next morning I called my sponsor and I said, I'd like to restart my time.
Right.
I feel like I've done this thing purposefully.
Right.
And, she wasn't in as much agreement of that as I.
Right.
And then, so that sort of indicated to me that maybe our time together was done.
Sure.
And no fault of hers.
Sure.
And then I did like a temporary sponsor for a while, but she was a little bit out there. And then I found the sponsor I have now, who is great.
So you basically recommitted yourself to sobriety and just kind of like found a new sponsor, and did you redo the steps?
I redid the steps.
And just kind of like
I did a powerful fourth step.
Did you do like a 90 and 90 or something?
No, because it was COVID.
Right.
I'm not going to sit on that many Zoom meetings. I can't stand those fucking Zoom meetings.
Are you back in? Do you go to meetings in real
I was
person?
just at one this morning at 7 a.m.
Nice.
Yeah, women's meeting. It was like nobody there. There was like 47 women on Zoom. I'm like, ladies, it's time to come back.
Yeah.
Get out of your bathrobe.
And how would you say your life changed getting sober? Like,
I had to start getting to know myself, I had to start learning like fundamentally who I was. I'm a sexual abuse survivor, so I woke up to that fact through a dream right around where I got sober, and that was a tandem road. So I'm not so like
who
it was my dad.
Right.
Yeah. So in much of my childhood. So that had been repressed.
And did you come to recognize that before he died?
He had died.
He had died, right.
But I did know something was up. A week before he died, he babysat my daughter and this is in my book. I have a book coming out next year. Yeah, called No More Denying Sexual Abuse, Making the Choices That Can Change Your Life. And it's really a self-help book about that, how potent that denial is and how long that can keep you from really living who you are on the path that you want to be, right? So I had denied it for so long and then done all this destructive behavior and drugs and alcohol and violence and all this stuff. So when I woke up to the dream, I was like, it's possible the way I've operated for most of my life is on a false identity created by the suppression of a story that I just could not face.
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would want to face that?
Yeah.
And you were in good standing with your dad before he died?
I mean, I guess.
I mean, whatever. I mean, any relationship with your parents
relatively
is so,
but
did he, but I mean, close enough that he was babysitting your child?
Well, he did it this one time. She was 9 months old. Right. This is my first child. And I went to the mall because he had moved from Rhode Island to California in this crazy, no warning road trip in a Jeep Cherokee he had leased with all his stuff in the back. And I thought, this is very, very odd.
So
I was like, well,
alcoholic
maybe, he
behavior.
wants to meet his granddaughter,
Right.
that makes sense. And so I let him babysit, and I was at the mall, and I had a massive freak out, like a massive anxiety attack. And I drove home like 100 miles an hour and just snatched her away. It was like that. It was like that. Something inside me.
Inside's like, no, don't. This is not safe. Yeah.
This is not safe. And he died a week later.
Wow.
Now, had he not died a week later, might I have let him take care of her again? Possibly.
Right. Because, when you're a parent,
you've
got little kids, you're just desperate.
Right. And would I have trusted that impulse?
Right.
I mean, when you ask what changed for me most in sobriety, is like, I am one of the most intuitive, empathic, sign-seeing, miracle-making people I know.
Right.
And that stuff is on fire for me all the time if I choose to see it.
Right.
And sobriety is the only way for that. The drugs and alcohol blurred all that. So now it's like I tell the guy I'm dating these things sometimes, and he just laughs, because it's like, I don't know whether he like signs up for that, but I'm like, can you believe what just happened? And he has to chuckle, because sometimes it's so crazy, out there that would appear at that time. But I'm also able and willing to see it.
And is your mother still alive?
She is.
And have you talked to her about
my mother and I have not spoken since like 18 months ago. I was sort of putting up with, I should be like forgiving that she didn't know. I mean, it's hard to fathom that, but that's what she claims. I mean, I don't know. As the mother of two daughters, I'm checked in with them. I would probably know, but I don't know what her issue is, or her repression, or her denial, or whatever.
Right.
But I was willing to have her come visit her children, and I was willing to try. But in my heart, I just don't think that I could forgive.
Sure.
I don't think I've 100.
Someone just like this dereliction of duty on some level, like,
right.
Where the fuck were you? Where
the fuck were you?
And if you didn't know, that's your fault.
And if you didn't know, yes, well said. And so really the crux of it was around 18 months ago, I had been doing this charity in Compton called the Compton Initiative, where you go, and I brought my daughters, and you paint houses and you paint fences. And I just like needed to do something charitable. Sure. And that's where I ended up. When I got there, I was like, oh God, it's really Christian. Like, I was really offended, right? But then I met this woman, Michelle, and Michelle was like from this church, Hope in Christ Church, and I really liked Michelle. And we went back, and one day after we did this work, we did a prayer circle outside the church for buying this house that I have. And I was like, the whole time I'm crying, like I'm sobbing, in this prayer circle. And then at the same time feeling like radically uncomfortable, So I go home, and then I buy the house, and I call her, and I go, you're not going to believe it, but the prayer circle worked. And then I started going to the church. Right. Now it's a Black Southern Baptist church.
Right.
And they got this new pastor, and he's on fire. He's this young guy from Atlanta, and like I just loved it. Right. And the music is like goes on before, and then they're starting to read the Bible. And I've always wanted to read the Bible as a writer. Sure. I've always wanted to read the Bible. And the talks, well, I got baptized. I'm now a Christian, right?
What was your religion prior?
So I've always been religious. It's interesting. Like I really forgot. It wasn't until I became a Christian that I realized that I was baptized as a Catholic. Right. And then I was a Baha'i with my parents, and then I was in a Quaker school, right. And then I was in a Catholic school.
There's always been a lot of,
and I was married to a Jew, and then it was nothing, and then I got into AA, right. And then spirituality became a thing. But after like 8 years in program, it wasn't enough for me. I needed something else, but I didn't know. And then the thought of like following Jesus was so traumatic. And so I had a couple friends in program who became Christians, right. That I knew were like me. They had done cocaine, right. And they were like philanthropists. And I called them up. I said, I'm really struggling because this is a bad time to be a Christian in America. Like, people are going to think I'm like pro-life, and they're going to think I'm a wackadoo. And they were like, no one can think anything about you but you, and your relationship with Jesus is your relationship with Jesus. And that's exactly what happened. Like, I got baptized, and I love this church, and I go on Sundays, and I just, it's really, that has actually brought something into my sobriety that I never expected.
Sure.
The reading of the Bible and the
whole community, I imagine.
It's a beautiful community. There's like a Sunday school with these women, and we talk about real life stuff. But the thing is that the principles that we learn in sobriety, especially like in AA with the primary book, the big book, I get it. I've lived by those principles. I've done the best I can.
Right.
But there is some stuff for me as a sexual abuse survivor that I allow myself to self-abandon. And there's something about the Christian in the Bible and the faith of being a good wife or being a good mother that I really need to hear that stuff, because I'm inherently a derelict. Right? So I'm going to go off and lose myself and be like, oh, that guy's fine. You know, and it's like, it's forcing me to be like, what do you really, what principles do you want to live by? You know, I want to be a good person. I want to be a good wife. I want to be a good mother. You know, I want to be a good friend. And it's really enhancing my sobriety a lot.
And your sister, have you guys talked about?
No, I tried. She was not
a survivor as well.
She would not. I could make no claim. I could make no claim.
Yeah, right. Are your children aware of this?
Oh, my older daughter is.
Right.
My younger daughter, she's a smart cookie. She's probably picked it up. But, you know, I mean,
kids know everything.
I haven't had a sit down with her about it.
And so you were saying that like your older daughter was sort of undone by resetting your sobriety date.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious about how you talk about drugs and alcohol and recovery with your kids.
Sure. I mean, my kids have no interest at this time to drink or do drugs.
That's amazing.
You know, I am like, if you feel the need to experiment. If it gets out of control, you know where to go.
Right.
That's a great thing that they know that they know there's a source, a solution. I'm not going to peg on them. I have said to them, you kind of have the odds stacked against you. Okay, you've got a mom who's an alcoholic. You've got a grandfather who's an alcoholic. You've got God knows where there's other alcoholism. There's some mental illness all over the place in the family. You might not want to drink.
Right.
Just saying.
Yeah.
But if you do, then, you know, there's a place for you. There's a seat for you.
Well, look, this has been really interesting. I mean, it took a turn that I didn't see coming.
I'm sorry. Which
that's
one?
The best.
The Christianity or the sexual abuse?
Both. I didn't see either of those things coming, and I was like, wow, how amazing. So, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Anything more, I feel free to chime in.
Thank you for being the first podcast recorded in my new garage space.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.